So if we assume that the Bocheting temperature for this particular honey is say 240, and we were going to use a color guide on a plate to tell us when it was ready. If we were to get it up to a certain color at, say, cooking it at 250 degrees and the same color at 350 degrees, are we going to see, do you think, a big flavor difference between those two just because it was at a higher temperature for a shorter amount of time? What's the difference between a short amount of time at a high temperature and a long amount of time at a low temperature?
That sounds like a great experiment to be given out at the conference.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, you can put that in and get a grant from the AMMA next year to do it.
Yeah. And that's part of the whole deal with the different types of bring it up, and I've done some of those experiments where you heat something up very fast, and you heat it to brown, which is again a very subjective term. I mean, maybe we can come up with some method to measure it, or you take that same lower temperature and get it to brown. What are going to be the difference in the flavor profiles? Because again, there's so many different variables, like the impurities. There's a lot of discussions on molasses. It's basically a lot of the impurities of sugar. How those, if you take regular table sugar and brown sugar, brown sugar will caramelize quicker than table sugar just because of the impurities, along with the acids. So trying to replicate that is difficult. But I will say that I plan on making some candies. So I'm going to make candy to pass out to kind of talk about that. So once you get up over 310, which is hard crack, I can take one candy and take it slow and low for a long time, and then bring it to hard crack very quickly, and then boom, there it is. And then you can also take one to hard crack within 2 minutes, and they'll be essentially similar in color, but they'll have a different taste. So I plan on passing that out as kind of a discussion point to just what you say. And again, I'm not a great molecular mind when it comes to those things, but I think at least from a sensory standpoint, what is the difference there? And I'm excited to have a little bit of discussion about that. So a little pieces of like hard honey that you can have stick to the roof of your mouth will be a lot of fun.
Honey that sticks to the roof of your mouth.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's like like kind of hard taffy. It's fun. I've done this before and kind of handed it out at the Homebrew Club, etc., and at the NAC conference as well. So it kind of gives people a better understanding of the different colors and how you get there. You got to bring it up
where
you are.
There you are.
But yeah.
You're cutting in and out just a little bit, and I'm hearing an echo.
Right.
Do you have the show playing in the background?
No.
Okay. I don't know where the echo's coming from then. Yeah, your volume's all over the place, so I wasn't sure if you were like moving back and forth in front of the computer or what.
I think I am getting excited and moving back.
I got to back you up there though. Whenever I've made a bochet, I've always got the plate out so that I can put a post about it, and I've done the color progression afterwards. I always enjoy cracking them off the plate and eating them like lollies. So yeah, I think that'll be a real winner and a crowd pleaser.
Who doesn't like candy?
Yeah. Especially.
I've actually made honey candy a couple of times, and now I've started adding white sugar to it because I find it burns before it gets to the hard crack stage that I want it at.
I'm really disappointed. I thought Ryan would have more questions, or maybe that's good because he likes to dig into the details. I'm guessing he's going to have more questions at the conference.
Well, actually, I didn't want to dig into asking you questions that you had prepared to actually ask or answer at the Mazer Cup. So I was kind of being quiet. I've had some experiences that I could have chimed in on, but I just didn't think it was worth it.
Well, what? Let's hear it.
Well, so I guess the only thing that I think of, I have found with the few bochets that I've made that there's a very fine line between it being just fine, and 5 or 10 degrees temperature difference higher can instantly ruin the whole thing. Like, it doesn't take very much. At some point, for each honey, there's a certain line, like you've already talked about, where it'll be really nice, and just a few more degrees higher than that, and it goes acrid very quick. And so
what do you use as your heating source?
Well, so just the steel coils on a stove. So it should be, very consistent, but I've just found that you can't get impatient. You have to go slow, and if you turn it up too high, it seems like there's a point where, in just a matter of 2 or 3 minutes, the whole damn batch can start getting acrid on you. And I just really, really cringe when I see that YouTube video of the guy cooking that shit until it's just black smoke galore on his big cast iron stove. I'm like, dude, you wouldn't be able to eat that shit in 1,000 years, because it's going to taste the same for 1,000 years.
Yeah. Are you talking about the one with the goats in the background?
Yeah, I think so. It's been a couple or 3 years since I watched it, but the guy was kind of and I don't mean to be disrespectful to anybody, but kind of a hillbilly type, and he was...
I would have described him as backyard brewer.
Well, there you go. And when I hear other people saying how they cook their honey until they had blue smoke, and I just cringe and say, my God, I'm so sorry that you ever saw that stupid video.
And I feel so bad.
I'm picturing a goat in his kitchen now, so I'm backing you up on the hillbilly.
Yeah.
Hey now. The goat's probably there to go, dude, what the hell?
Right?
You're ruining it.
You're ruining
Yeah, but
it.
it's in his kitchen in my head.
I've told people before that you couldn't get starving pigs to eat that stuff.
Oh, no, it's pigs.
Yeah, you probably could. Pigs will eat anything.
Yeah.
So, Matt, I guess I do have a question that came to mind earlier. Can you actually look at the data that's in Ken's book that we can see on the honey varietals, and are there particular data fields there that you can look at that would immediately then give us some metrics or parameters how to prepare that certain particular varietal based on some of the parameters in that book?
Yes and no. So I think there needs to be a baseline for your... But to your point about what that is, so I would suggest having a consistent honey, so whatever honey you pick,
mm-hmm.
and then using it multiple times or making a big batch of it and then using it over and over again. But, like I said, the variables, impurities such as ash, you could look
mm-hmm.
at that. That's
mm-hmm.
going to increase the reaction of the caramelization.
Okay.
pH or acid,
mm-hmm.
so the amount of what pH that honey is at, the closer it is to 7, the less that it's going to react. So you can kind of have an idea. So just like I said before, if you go, wow, that really went quick, maybe you could try a different honey with something that's a little bit more neutral, less ash, or has less fructose in it, because frankly, fructose is going to be the first sugar to caramelize. So I would say, maybe there are a couple honeys in here, and now I'm also further refining the presentation. Perhaps there's a honey in here with less fructose, less ash, and a more neutral pH that would be less reactive and maybe give you more time from that red to black stage, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Might be easier to work with. But, I think another one is in recipe formulation. I was talking about Bob before, is you can also not just use it, just that honey that you're caramelizing. You can go maybe to brown and then cut it with half in there. You really want a lot of marshmallow? Then you're not caramelizing the marshmallow, the metal foam at all, or burning it or whatever you want to call it, but then you're actually cutting it. So you don't have all of that acrid. In fact, one of the best meads that I made was, I'd say, a little bit more on the brown to black scale, and then I used 75% clover honey with it. So it was only like 25% actual caramelized honey.
Right.
It turned out great. And I also think a lot to be said for adding spices. I mean, I always think candy when I think of this stuff. Just a straight bochet sometimes might just be one note. So.
Josh has just asked that question. What ratio? Like you just said, in that case, he used 25% almost acrid honey. What kind of ratio do you normally go for, or is it just whatever you feel like to taste?
I think it's a lot to taste, but I think of it. So I've been a home brewer for about 20 years, and I was always very much into hitting a style. Again, with competitions, you're trying to, you have ratios. So you'd use, if it was a Pilsner, you're using 100% Pils malt, right? So that's, if it's a very light caramelization, I'm transferring to the honey. If it's very light, well, you can use 100%. But now if you're going to make some kind of stout, you'd only use maybe like 2-3% of that like burnt black patent malt, right? So it really depends on how acrid or what you're going for. I used the creme brulee analogy before. It's if you want burnt, you can use burnt, but only use maybe 5-10%, and the rest should be vanilla and lots of other honeys, etc. To kind of counterbalance that. So. It really depends on how far you go. The crock pot honeys that I've used, generally speaking, I'll use just mostly the crock pot honey. But if I use a pot that maybe has some, now I've realized I went through with that FLIR thermal imaging camera. I went all over my house. It's great. I went through all these different pots. I realized,
new toy. Let's take a picture of the wall. Oh my God, look at that.
My wife basically approved a new front entry when she saw how much heat we're losing, so it was just amazing. So we have windows around our front door, and it was just like, oh my gosh, you could just see the wafting in of cold air. But and frankly, how many bad pots? I was amazed. A brew pot that I had that I thought was pretty good wasn't very good at all. So it had lots of spots where it just wasn't very good at dispersing heat. So I'm not saying everybody needs to go out there and get a thermal imaging camera, but maybe that makes a difference. And, I don't know, when it comes to, Sergio, when he's talking about that big 55-gallon drum, I don't know how well that's, I think probably his best bet is going to be go slow and low for as long as possible, because if he goes too high and tries to, like Ryan says, try to speed it up, you're going to have these hot spots that might be 300 plus degrees and give you more of those acrid notes. I don't know. I've never worked with a 55-gallon drum. So, but you know what I'm saying? It's like they don't do very well at evenly distributing heat.
What I've seen a couple of people that are doing it on a larger scale, and even actually some people that are doing it on a smaller, is creating heat boxes. And what they do is they put the honey into a container that they've created, and heat the container up so that the thing is completely surrounded by the air, like putting it in an oven basically. And so you're getting even heat because it's surrounded by air all at the same temperature in theory. So
because air is such a poor conductor of heat, it gives you a nice even heat flow.
Exactly. So
it doesn't matter if if you get a convection current of air that's hotter, it's not going to have much effect because it's such a poor conductor of heat. That's where ovens work well. And a lot of commercial beekeepers will have ovens specifically for decaramelizing honey. Yeah. And I know of somebody here in Australia whose controller broke, and he had it running at 100 degrees Celsius almost. I can't remember what that is in Fahrenheit.
That's 212.
For a whole weekend, and basically had a couple of IBCs of caramelized honey that didn't have an acrid flavor. And so he came to me asking me, can we make bochet out of this? What do I do? Because I can't sell it as honey anymore.
Wow.
And so,
Italian burnt honey.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Charge extra.
Marketing.
It's a perfect But it's the perfect example. People have said, how do you commercialize it? You can't bring it up big. And it's like, well, we've already got things. Just buy them off the shelf. There's a honey oven you can buy as a beekeeper.